So far on my channel, I've covered many notable groups swapping their main fights, such as the infamous Akatsuki, in which I took each member and had them swap positions with their partner in their main fight. I also covered the Sannin and What If Jiraiya and Orochimaru swap fights, and I've been dying to talk more about the Part 1 Chunin area characters recently, so today I'll be taking a look at the Genin who fought the Sound 4, and then swapping their matches with their partner in the group. So, for the fights that will be covered today, we do have Rock Lee versus Kidomaru, Neji versus Kimimaru initially, Shikamaru versus Jirobo, Choji versus Tayuya, Gaara versus Sakon and Ukon, and then we'll have Kiba help Neji fight Kimimaru. And yes, Gaara and Kiba are obviously not partners, however I still wanted to include both of them in this matchup, so yeah. Now it should also be said that the characters were, they're going to be swapped out from the point that they initially fought their opponent. So, they will still have the chakra fatigue from Jirobo and whatnot, so they're not just going to already come in at full power, and let's get started with how Rock Lee would perform against Kidomaru, who is the strongest enemy according to the chapter title in Neji's position. Now, Rock Lee, the Blue Beast, is actually really interesting and is quite a different fighter to Neji, who, while they are rivals, is likely greater than himself, as we know that Neji is commonly implied to be the narrative peak of the Konoha 11 or 12, such as the data book noting his already Chunin level ability, and where he sits at the top of the Genin contenders during the Chunin exams, with the fan book, a book written entirely by Kishimoto himself, having Kakashi's authentic mission report writings which state that Neji is the strongest Genin, even after noting how he left Naruto to train with Ebisu while he took on Sasuke, just implying that Kakashi thinks that Neji is stronger than Sasuke after their training. And there are even more, such as how Neji is stated, or is considered to be widely the greatest Genin by the anime profile guides, with both Rock Lee and Tenten during the exam stating how he is the strongest and no one could ever actually beat Neji. Even Orochimaru himself made note to warn the Sound 4 of Neji and his ocular mastery and precision, which has actually grown since the exams, as we know that Neji now has the 8 Trigrams 128 palms, and this also is consistent with another thing that absolutely nobody seems to ever bring up, which is how in Naruto Retsuden, Naruto ends up losing all of his chakra access due to having a chakra network disease, and Orochimaru tries to give him some chakraless prototype Byakugan goggles, and when Naruto tries to learn how to use them, he searches through Neji's old personal diary that he was writing during the exams, which notes things like him trying to dodge things in his blind spots with Tenten helping him during training, and we also do see them train alone a lot, and Neji himself also notes how he lost to Naruto due to total unpredictability and the ability to sway hearts, with the fanbook also saying that he was off guard. But the most important statement is how Naruto states that, quote, Neji hadn't skipped a single day in the record of training on his own. That's who he was. He was a genius. He also worked tirelessly and was harder on himself than anyone else. End quote. Now, this just straight up implying that Neji never stopped training and worked more and harder on himself than anyone else did, which would obviously be consistent with Kakashi's mission reports from earlier. Now for Lee, this is pretty bad because while Neji got stronger, Lee is actually implied to have gotten weaker than he was during the exams due to his stay at the hospital. Gaara states that Lee was sharper and faster when they last fought, and this is a drunken Lee who he was seeing, fight Kimimaru, who is really impressive, certainly the strongest of the Sound 5, which Lee is shown while drunk to be capable of utilizing his unorthodox style and speed to get a hit in on Kimimaru, such as clashing with him, grabbing his shirt sleeve, and then throwing him so he can kick him and blitz him in the air where Kimimaru can't really move. We can also see him react to all of Kimimaru's bones, and this is a Kimimaru who never really took the offensive until he noted how Lee was too unorthodox and, moreover, too quick. So while we don't know what version of Lee Gaara was actually thinking back to, whether it was his 5th gate reverse lotus, which is probably not, or just his base state, in the Naruto anime movies there is a time where Lee was using the gates in which he couldn't really cover much ground on his opponent, but then he got drunk and most certainly did. So this could have some implications, but for me, I think the gates are a safer choice to say which are greater. Now, Lee does get his alcohol here, which has its pros, such as him being so unorthodox it grants him a pseudo ultra instinct like in Dragon Ball, as shown when he dodges all of Kimimaru's bones rather casually. So, for example, right, we know that this has advantages, like say Lee fought a Sharingan user. This drunken fist would be much more effective than the gates, which while they may be faster, are also very linear. There really is a time and place for each of these and which one is better at those points, I guess, right? So, I think Kishimoto was trying to convey this as well, like convey a comparison with the alcohol actually first being introduced nearly 120 chapters earlier on the cover chapter of 82. Now, the gates are certainly faster. As we could see from sheer speed alone, Lee is completely capable of blowing apart the entire preliminary battleground floor made of concrete, which is much more dense than the grass that he fought Kimimaro on. This is consistent with Lee being able to blitz Gaara over 15 times in one panel with his attack pattern resembling Might Guy's Sekizo barrage against Madara. So this, to me, definitely implies that the gates are faster than the Drunken Fist, while it's just a little more unorthodox. This could prove bad for Lee, since a weaker Neji than the one who Kidomaru is slightly above is stated directly by Guy to require Lee's 5th gate reverse lotus combo to even take down, which can add consistency to Might Guy stating that how in terms of speed, Lee can't be surpassed, with Lee's speed also being called unrivaled. So this would just be talking about the peak 5th gate speed, which is also using a reverse lotus, a technique that draws out potentially even 80% more ability. This means that Neji in his peak speed was just on the level or maybe slightly below, maybe around the 3rd to 4th gate level. Probably not 3rd, just disingenuous, but whatever. This means that when taking, attacks like even Kidomaru's webs, this could prove much more of a challenge than it did for Neji, which shouldn't surprise anyone considering the scaling I just provided on top of Kidomaru, even stating that Neji is the strongest of the group. The initial webs fired out by base Kidomaru can even overcome Neji's combat speed with their sheer numbers, and this is with Neji using his stylistic advantage in his Byakugan, seeing the chakra before it was ever even fired, meaning that a fighter like base Lee would probably be done for in this situation, just to be honest. So you could say, luckily for Lee, he takes his medicine quite early, and he could get the Drunken Fist, meaning that his unorthodox approach to weaving attacks could just have him weaving all the webs due to how he is so willing to dodge here. And this is probably likely as well as, no matter how you think Kimimaro stacks up to the transformed Sound 4, him being above them all base to base is pretty consistent. I mean, listen, he could dodge these webs, if he gets the alcohol. Now, if he does get caught, it's over. Obviously, Lee obviously doesn't have the ability to literally eject chakra from all over his body to slow the arrow. So, if he doesn't get hit, then we don't know if Kidomaru still uses the golden arrow. But if so, if it's really at its low forms, then he could probably dodge it. But if Kidomaru recognizes his his unorthodox speed as a threat, then it's over for Lee. Now, with this being said, Kidomaru was able to use his gold armor whilst Neji was blitzing him with the 8 trigrams 64 palms, and Lee being, that quick is only at his peak levels, so this armor activation speed is likely just far faster than Lee, and Lee doesn't really have anything to get past it. He also doesn't have anything to halt and slow down all of Kidomaru's surrounding attacks like how Neji did, so there just isn't really much Lee can do in this situation. Him also entering the gates on top of it is unlikely as well, considering how he sort of implies he needs to take it easy and only uses the first, so if Lee was in Neji's position, he probably couldn't beat Kidomaru. Following Lee's match, we have his partner Neji facing off against his opponent being Kimimaro. And for Kimimaro, this is quite interesting as Neji is only going to be in Lee's position, meaning that Gaara will still come to help, but in this case, that'll actually be Kiba, and we'll get to his fight with Neji against Kimimaro later, but for now, how does Neji actually do in the initial scuffle with Kimimaro? And to answer that, I actually think he does quite well. Playing off the last discussion, Neji is just an overall greater fighter than Lee, and while he is more orthodox, he is also still much faster, which was one of the things that actually gave Kimimaro his incentive to take an offensive approach due to how dangerous this actually was. And this shouldn't really be any different here. Neji has the 8 trigrams 128 palms to capitalize on the initial offense needed, and another interesting note is how this jutsu actually hits and shuts down the chakra points in your network, and these points are actually deeply intertwined with internal organs and muscles, causing a total shutdown of the body if they are actually hit. Now, the only way to circumvent this is through an external chakra source being implemented, and the external chakra source in this case would be the curse mark, which is described to actually hyperactivate the points with more chakra, meaning that if Neji were to hit these, it would shut the curse mark down entirely. As for once Kimimaro actually takes the role of aggressor, Neji has an absolute impenetrable defense, one even greater than Gaara's, who was saving Lee several times from Kimimaru's blows and attacks, which Neji should also be able to do as well. Neji can also, just do the same strategy he did against Kidomaru if Kimimaro decides to fire the bones, and Neji could then just project chakra out to heavily slow them down. So trust me, I know this was quick, but we will come back to this when, we get to Kiba and to kind of conclude this fight. But for now, Neji passes in Lee's position to fend off Kimimaro. If you're super pressed, there's timestamps for you, so go there. Yo, okay, bet you didn't see me coming, or you probably did. So, I can inform you that, if you're enjoying this and you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe and comment what you want to see next. I have a lot more of these Chunin-esque topics to bring to the table with new things every single time, so make sure you don't miss out, so subscribe. Back to the video. Next up, we have Shikamaru versus Jirobo, and this matchup is kind of interesting stylistically considering how Shikamaru and Choji are polar opposite fighters. They are teammates as well, and the chapter 187 synopsis statement states that they're actually the strongest duo. So it's also, it's pretty complicated as there isn't really a mere metric to compare these two. If you go off the original opponents, we know that Tayuya is likely stronger than Jirobo, as he is implied to be the weakest of the 4 or 5. Kabuto notes that when the mission is slower, it's likely due to the ever-hungry Jirobo or Kidomaru just playing around too much. However, Jirobo is actually the only one that doesn't have a statement or implication of an ability being greater than the other members. For example, Kidomaru is called the strongest opponent by the chapter cover. Sakon is called the most troublesome due to how he needs to kill his opponents rather than letting them go at a certain point. This makes him the strongest of the Sound 4, and Tayuya is stated to be no less vain than that by Orochimaru, so take this what you will. There's a lot of implications by each of these characters, but Sakon's statement is more talking about his abilities and how lethal or troublesome he is again, and we also do have an objective median stating that Kidomaru is the strongest, with him also being implied narratively as well, with the only other one being at his level being Kimimaru. And Orochimaru does rebuttal back at Kabuto and note how in comparison to Sakon, Tayuya is no less vain, meaning having or showing an especially high opinion of one's appearance, abilities, or worth, and this could imply that in terms of ability, Tayuya is similar or greater to even Sakon, and she is still obviously under Kimimaru, as he states that for her mess, he would kill her on the spot, but he'll let her live so she can beat Naruto and Shikamaru, with base Naruto pressuring base Tayuya quite much, quite a bit, causing her to sweat and whatnot. And the last metric of directly comparing them is how Tayuya states that what she really thinks of Jirobo, and she kind of just says, be useful for once, but the other translations have her calling Jirobo an inferior loser and stuff like that, and this is pretty important as this means that Shikamaru is capable of combating an opponent greater than Jirobo, just straight up. Sakon also just calls him the weakest member, so I think, saying that Shikamaru could use his shadow possession to catch Jirobo off guard is actually very likely. He could also capitalize on how Jirobo in character tends to rip up rocks a lot and dirt from the ground, just completely wreaking havoc, which gives Shikamaru more shadows to work with, making the battleground much like his fight with Temari, where he used his jacket and headband as a parachute for more shadows to kind of rejuvenate his shadow to increase the distance. And this is even more true if Jirobo uses something like his crushing palm attack, and Shikamaru is probably faster than Choji, but weaker, of course. So we know that Shikamaru was capable of keeping up with Temari, who could react to a kick from base Lee and call it nothing impressive, and Choji just doesn't have any metrics like that. So, Shikamaru could definitely capitalize with these shadows on time if Jirobo uses something like this and maybe catch him off guard. The only real problem for Shikamaru is how, Jirobo can get 10 times stronger. Now, some people do believe this is strength, some people believe it's just a chakra increase, but I will say either one is fine. Alternate translation sites, do have them just stating strength, actually, but if you think it's, chakra, then Shikamaru could take the win and eventually set up a trap or something to beat Jirobo. If not, then there is a good chance that Shikamaru could get pressed and, mess up in close range, as he is, more of a middle range fighter according to Tayuya, and Jirobo would just get an advantage. So all in all, I would say that Shikamaru could probably win in Choji's place, but it is a close fight. It just depends how you think Jirobo approaches this, and similar to Shikamaru. Okay, so next up we have the sound user being Tayuya and her opponent Choji. in which this is actually really interesting, as Choji faced Dosu during the Chunin exam, so we actually have a direct metric of how Choji would approach this in character. Now, how Tayuya approaches this is a bit complicated because the beginning of her entire bout with Shikamaru is off screen with Tayuya just pushing him into a corner, so we don't really know how she starts these fights, but whatever. Then, she obviously uses her summons and then just, kind of hunts down Shikamaru. Now, of course, Shikamaru, beat this using his final 9 attacks to stage a point where he can analytically read her finger movements to grasp the patterns at which they can be moved. Choji obviously isn't going to do that because A, he can't, and B, he doesn't fight that way off start against sound users. This is shown against Dosu in the Chunin exams, where Choji, being fearful of these sound waves, stuck his head into his body full of fat, and then plugged his ears entirely, then of course was beaten via shockwaves. This is crucial as these shockwaves were used because the human body is 70% water, causing his whole body to vibrate and take the damage. Sound waves do not really act like this, however. Sound waves differ in that shockwaves travel faster than sound, with their speed actually increasing as the amplitude is raised, but the intensity said shockwave also decreases faster than does that of a sound wave, because some of the energy of the shockwave is actually expended to heat the medium in which it travels. This virtually means that the shockwaves are far more effective and faster than the sound waves, meaning that Choji's strategy would likely prevent him from actually being caught in the Genjutsu. This, combined with, how he will take the pills, just sort of puts this match in Choji's favor in my opinion. You could even argue that his Art of Expansion would just crush these summons. If not, this could actually give Tayuya the advantage though with her hungry chakra worms, as they would just have more to work with and just more of Choji to suck into. But I really don't believe there's a metric to make any assertion either way. But once Choji goes red pill, it's virtually impossible for Tayuya to really do anything. I think the only way to say that she does come out on top would just really invest in Orochimaru calling her a contender for the strongest in the Sound 4, and say that she was unable to utilize her full potential just due to how Shikamaru was able to best her with his intelligence, not raw combat. However, this is likely unlikely, just considering how in the scene where the Sound 4 pull up and test Sasuke and combat him, Tayuya doesn't do a thing, and really left that to mainly sack on Kidomaru and Jirobo. So without a rather generous interpretation, I think it's pretty fair to claim that Choji should just take this matchup if he was in Shikamaru's position, or would at least do better. At the very least, you could just say, how Choji is strong enough to hold Tayuya off long enough for Temari to arrive, so Choji takes it. So Gaara versus Sakon and Ukon replacing Kiba is our next match. And yes, I'm aware that Gaara has absolutely no relation to Kiba, but I figured you guys still wanted to hear me talk about him because I think Gaara alongside Neji is the most powerful Genin and is clearly the peak in terms of his narrative. Now, facing the leader of the Sound 4, this is actually pretty interesting. Now, I know I addressed it prior, but Sakon being the strongest is just in reference to how he is the leader and his assassination ability, with Ukon is the most dangerous. In this case though, Gaara's sand would protect him from this at really any chance of Ukon ever taking a hold of his body. This is consistent, as in terms of lethality, Orochimaru states that Tayuya is just as deadly as Sakon, yet Kimimaro, a character who Gaara could combat, was casually threatening to murder her on the spot if it wasn't for Naruto and Shikamaru being a nuisance. And in Kimimaru's bout with Gaara though, we can actually see Gaara first in his first encounter, his sand was able to intercept Kimimaru's combat speed point blank to, Lee's face, saving him, with him also using the sand speed to perfectly block Kimimaru's digital shrapnel bone projectiles. This also is just really key because while Gaara isn't, as fast combatively, I guess, as Lee, he does still have both the sand speed on, on his level and some reaction speeds as well on Lee's level, shown whenever Gaara was about to get messed up, and Lee then intercepted and kicked Kimimaru in the face, but then while in the air, he was going to get hurt, and Gaara's sand was able to intercept that and save Lee from Kimimaru's tail, so, they can combo together and whatnot. This is consistent with Kimimaru emerging from the Bracken dance, in which both Lee and Gaara turn their heads together at the same speed. So, with these speeds, I think this kind of paints a picture of a very easy fight for Gaara against Sakon. We could see that Kimimaro is objectively greater than Sakon, in which Gaara can combo, and react and even catch, this Kimimaro off guard with his sand, showing relativity to a Lee who can also react to Kimimaro's attacks even more. So while the sand has its limits, which was previously post-training Sasuke and Weightless Lee, characters about the same speed, now even Lee has noted that while he's gotten weaker, Gaara's gotten stronger. This means that, this limit of what could bypass the sand has also gone up linearly to Gaara's power increase. Otherwise, you've faced problems like the V2 Raikage and Weightless Lee being relative in speed. So here, Gaara, he just can't really get hit by anything that Sakon has in his taijutsu arsenal. Even Kankuro could react to Ukon's taijutsu, so I mean, Gaara shouldn't really have any problems. This is bad, and this will actually force Sakon to attempt to use Ukon's assassination attempt, and which this wouldn't even take over Gaara's body, as this was countered by Kankuro with him using a puppet as a decoy, and since it's already been established that Gaara's sand speed is much greater than Sakon's combat speed or technique, Gaara can also literally substitute out an identical hollow sand clone, to which Gaara could then just make him do whatever he wants to then solo out the battle. With just Sakon, once, Ukon as, attacks, this could definitely, Gaara could probably just put him in like a sand coffin or do the same to the, the clone and whatnot. And this is typically a one-shot, and the only reason why I didn't one-shot Kimimaro is due to his ability to manipulate the calcium levels in his bones, which I don't think that, Sakon has anything like that, so it's probably abysmal for Sakon as well once Ukon goes down. Gaara by this point has lost the hatred and possesses many more abilities and has honed his skills and the ability to manipulate his sand in much more effective ways than before, such as his total sand defense, Shukaku's shield technique, which was even so durable that Kimimaru's giant flower spear was just shattered on impact. So nothing in Sakon's arsenal could really pierce it either. The technique is essentially just Gaara pulling the densest and most durable minerals from the ground, which he then manipulates into sand, forming the shield. He also has other combos, that are even worse, like his sand tsunami, right? We would just turn the battlefield more into Gaara's favor with that much sand. So, to be honest, if Gaara was in Kiba's position, he's just big boloing pretty much anything Sakon has and is going to win. Anyway, speaking of Kiba, we will be resuming the match from earlier where Neji was, cleared in Lee's position against Kimimaro, with now Kiba taking Gaara's place to help aid Neji in their task of beating Kimimaro to death or just outlasting him until he inevitably drops dead. Now, this conversation doesn't really change much because, while Neji is more than capable of parrying off Kimimaro with his rotation that's likely greater than a 4th Gate Lee, who is much faster than a Drunken Fist Lee, who is able to react to Kimimaro. So, Neji's defense, pretty much allows him to either make the choice of parrying Kimimaro off until he dies, or take a more, offensive risk and try to save Kiba and prevent him from getting hurt. However, I don't think this is actually that unlikely, especially with how Neji's new outlook on life not being so fatalistic, and he's more open to the idea of helping his comrades. So this means that Neji can display a lot of these same defensive moves that he used against Kidomaru, such as him projecting chakra out of his body to slow the objects down and the enemy attacks down, allowing him to use his Byakugan to cover the ground more, and he just has the impenetrable rotation to then hit these attacks away, which Kidomaru only ever really got through due to his many omnidirectional attacks and just his overwhelming quantity of attacks. Kimimaro doesn't have these attacks. Kimimaro is established slower or relative to Neji already. This makes this case for him winning very difficult. Neji could also just take an offensive approach and shut his chakra network down, with Kiba using his Fang over Fang or other attacks to help pressure this Kimimaro to the point of exhaustion. Neji would also be capable of using the Byakugan to point out, which Osteoclast and Osteoblast bones have been more calcified than the others, and which ones would actually pose more of a threat, allowing Kiba to also know these. If Kimimaro goes underground, Neji's Byakugan sees in X-ray-like fashion, and Akamaru can smell where he's at, making him pretty much unable to hide anywhere. With the X-ray vision, Kiba and Neji can also combo attack, like with Kiba's smoke bombs, where Neji can just perfectly see through it and use his 8 trigrams 128 palms. So yeah, I mean, let's be honest here, Kiba and Neji are not losing this. But to conclude the video, I just want to say, I really did enjoy the nuance of this discussion, as there also was a lot of research. So if you guys could, please maybe consider liking or subscribing, just showing some love to the video. But yeah, as always, love you guys.